Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to Sentence Prompts for Better Communication. Who doesn't love a good formula? I am going to give you a number of prompts that will help you and also ways to respond to things that can be helpful in almost any scenario. Now, obviously, we have limited time here, but sometimes you just want a formula of what do I actually say? So I want to address a few different scenarios and what I would suggest that you say for each. Let's start with how to focus your conversations. So that would be number one. When someone says, "Tell me about yourself," we all get this question, and it can be daunting to answer that. Well, what do I say? And it reminds me of a story that some of you may have heard me tell before, but it was so prominent. It was when I was helping somebody interview for an internal position at a large biotech in the Bay Area. She was already a senior leader. So when I asked her, "Tell me about yourself," she told me a lot about herself. She told me a lot about her background and her resume. And I thought, okay, time out. Think about me first. I'm the hiring manager. I'm probably stacking you up against 4 to 5 other candidates if I'm lucky. And I want to make the quickest decision possible to know if you're going to be the right person for the job. When you give me your background, that may include 10 things. The problem with that is that now you're putting me in the position to have to filter through those details to figure out which one is the most important. And when we do that to someone else, we're not as effective. So it's like data dumping, giving too much information to one person at a time. So you want to prioritize it for them. Here's how I'd recommend you do it. Instead, and what we did is I did the role play again and I said, "Tell me about yourself." And well, let me get back up. I had said to her, "Okay, what's the most important thing that you want to tell me as the hiring manager about your qualifications for this role?" And she said, "Oh my gosh, well, I love research. That's the lead of my story." She didn't quite say it that way, but I'm saying that is the lead of her story. So we did it again. And I said, "Tell me about yourself." And she said, "Before I go into any detail, the most important thing you need to know is that I love research." Right there, the lead of her story beautifully came out right up front. And that's what I would suggest, to make sure that when somebody says that, "Tell me about yourself," that you have a lead to your story that you're starting with. Now, another option around this is, what would you like most? Here's another thing you could say back. When somebody says, "Tell me about yourself," you say back, "What would you most like to know about me?" This was really personal for me, actually, in a great way, great learning. And I thought, oh, this is why I suggest doing this. I actually followed my own advice. And that was meeting somebody at a networking event. And I thought we were going to do a follow-up call just for the sake of networking. And at the beginning, she said, "Well, tell me about yourself." And I stopped. Here was my good coaching to myself. I stopped and I asked her, "What would you most like to know about me?" Or another alternative is, "What most interests you about me?" Well, because I did that, she started talking about herself for a while. And then she said, "Well, I guess what I really want to know is how you can help me." And that was brilliant because it was so much more efficient that way. Because now I knew what she wanted and needed from the conversation. It wasn't just a networking call. It was that she actually wanted to know how I could help her. And she ended up becoming one of my clients. So really important to keep that in mind when someone asks you that question. The other thing that I wanted to say there is that, oh, what I was going to say, here's the direction that we often go. Somebody says, "Tell me about yourself." And we start launching in about our history. And because I really like this person, I thought we would be like almost friends kind of relationship. I was thinking I was going to tell her about my upbringing and a little bit about what brought me to college on the East Coast and to San Francisco. And I thought, wow, imagine all the time that I could have wasted had I not stopped and asked her that question back. So all of this is related to focusing your conversations. Let's talk about a few others. And by the way, you are welcome to get my book, and I have a whole chapter on all of these sentence prompts. So, other ways to be focused. What I most want from this call is this is one of my favorites. When you get on a call, you know how sometimes you're on a call or you're in the beginning of a meeting and nobody really says what the purpose is, you just start talking. And I find that to be very frustrating, and it's also pretty inefficient. So at the beginning of the call, you want to start with that. If it's somebody that you're potentially serving or you're leading the call, I would say to you either there's one of two things. What I most want from this call is, or how can I best support you? And I call that my crowd pleaser because most people are really surprised when I ask that question. How can I best support you in this call? What would you like to get from this call? So those are great ways to focus your conversation. Another one that I love is, how does that land for you? This is a great, great tool to focus it, get their thought about it. And for those of you that have your own businesses and you want to ask that question so you can, well, let's go back scenario wise. Let's say, and this could be for anybody, corporate world or entrepreneur, you are putting a price of something out there. And it's probably a little more focused toward the entrepreneur, but nonetheless, I digress. Asking them for how that lands with them. So you say the price, and then how does that land for you? This could be in corporate where you're showing an idea, and then you say, how does that land for you? And the key here is to pause. Don't jump in and try to answer it for them or assume that because there's silence that your price is too high or they're just not happy with the price. Give them a moment to process. That will help a lot. Another one that I find really helpful, and one of my dear friends, Cynthia Cubing, came up with this one. When somebody starts talking about something, stop them and say, hey, I just want to check in. Do you want my opinion or do you just want me to listen? That can be a great way for them to stop, because a lot of times people just truly do start talking and they don't think about, oh yeah, is there a point here? Sometimes I've personally been in conversations where I had no idea what the point was and why they wanted to talk to me, which I find really hilarious. Here's another one. This is one of my favorites, when people are going on and you don't know where it's going, is to say, excuse me for interrupting. How can I best help you? Or let's say you're the one that they're helping. Excuse me for interrupting. Here's how you can best help me. Is it okay if I interject right now and share that? Most of the time, people have no clue how much they're talking and how unfocused they are. I don't mean that in a bad way, but I do think that it's something that happens a lot. Okay. Here's another one of my favorites that can reframe the conversation. It can make or break it depending upon your tone. And that's not even something we're talking about right now, is tone, but we're talking about content right now. Instead of saying, this is a say this, not that suggestion. Instead of saying, why did you do that? Say, what was your logic behind that? Or one of my other favorites is, help me understand your reasoning behind that. What I love about this is that our go-to reaction is, why the heck did you do that? But when we stop and we ask a more thoughtful question, it shows that we're actually curious about the answer, not just that it's accusing them, saying why. The other one, say this, not that, another one of my favorites, when you disagree. Instead of saying, I disagree with that, or I don't like that, which usually puts people on the defensive immediately, say instead, I have another perspective, or I'd like to share another perspective. Or it could even be, I'd like to share my perspective on that. Much more collaborative and expansive rather than feeling like, ooh, you're on different sides. There's so many good ones in here. I'm excited for you all to read my book if you want to buy it. I'm really proud of the different things that I wrote here. Okay. How about when you need an open dialogue? A lot of people, particularly facilitators or leaders of meetings, often say, "Does anybody have questions?" or "Do you have any questions?" Instead of that, say, "What questions do you have?" The first one, "Do you have any questions?" is a closed-ended. People are either going to say yes or no. And oftentimes they won't say anything. So, what questions do you have assumes that the audience has questions. And you're also showing, I want to answer your questions. It provides even more of an open experience, especially for you leading. It makes you look like a better leader, even. These are all subtle things, but they definitely add up. And people will be more likely to ask when we ask it in an open way. And another one I really like around how to draw someone out is tell me more. That is the best and most powerful thing that you could say to someone when you're in a dialogue. Tell me more. This is a great way to draw people out. It might feel uncomfortable sometimes because it's often really powerful after a pause. And I say it might feel uncomfortable because you might be inclined to keep talking. And if you stop and say, "Tell me more," and they say a few things and you say, "Tell me more." What's also really interesting from an emotional intelligence perspective, the research tells us that when this round happens 3 times, someone says something, you say, "Tell me more." They say something, you say, "Tell me more." 3 times of that is when you really get to the heart of either an issue or what's really going on for the person. Because most people are going to tell you the surface stuff in the beginning. But if you want to draw them out, that's a great way to do it. I also recognize that there are times when you don't want to draw people out. So then telling me more would not be the right strategy in that point. So that is another good one. Okay. The other one here I wanted to share with you is avoiding the drop down menu. This one I find hilarious, and so many of us do it. I do it. I'm working on it. I'm much better than I used to be. But I remember being in one of my corporate positions, and I would often be the subject matter expert on calls with clients, and the salesperson was asking their questions and all of that. And a lot of times, the way that they would ask questions is something like this. "Okay, so I'm really looking forward to working with you. What kind of solution do you need? Are you looking for something related to conflict? Are you looking for something related to boundaries? Are you looking for something related to presence?" And they just kind of give 3 or 4 options. And then oftentimes the response was none of those things, which I thought was hilarious. Another example of a waste of breath. If we want to be more efficient, just ask the question, "What kind of solution were you looking for?" Pause, let them speak. Then you can decide how to adjust the conversation based on what they say. But be careful about that. And if we stay quiet and listen only, it can be so much more powerful and efficient. Let's go back for a moment to the why. Asking, well, why did you do that? Instead of what what or excuse me, what was your logic behind that? I already forgot myself. Side note, behind the scenes, I don't usually use notes, and now I'm actually using some notes based on what I wrote in the book. But the other option is to front load a conversation. I find this to be really helpful with something like, in an effort to understand. Like, let's say there's already tension where the person thinks, "Oh, great, she's going to ask me this or that." In an effort to understand, or my intent is to understand, can you clarify what happened in that scenario? Or can you help me understand the logic? It takes them off of feeling potentially judged and refocuses them on the reasoning. Because if we can get to the reason and not the person personally, we're going to be a lot more efficient. And even more important than efficiency is that we're going to have a better relationship with the person. They're going to feel more safe in our presence to be able to speak up and say something that they might otherwise have been uncomfortable. So we've got to create that space for people as well. All right. Well, that is a bit of a teaser on that. Again, more examples in the book. But as a reminder, being focused in your conversations, and then say this, not that. That's really what this whole episode was about. And one of the things I wanted to share is that I would love to hear scenarios of yours that you're unsure what to say back to. If you have an example of something like that, please email me or message me or wherever you can find me. I'm at karenlaus.com. I mean, all the links are here in the show notes. But I would love to know, is there a scenario where you've been stumped and you want to ask, hey, Karen, what would you say to make this better? I would love to hear it. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.